All right, shalom, shalom, shalom. All praises to the Most High, Yahweh, Bashem, Hamashiach, Wamalak, Yahweh. I am your Akazaki Yahu, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth, I say shalom, wa baruki, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day when the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries and all those who hate under our feet. All praises to the Almighty Yah. Hallelujah. All right. Welcome back again for another video review with your Akazaki Yahoo representing the Army of Yah, AOY. And this one is one of those. This is one of those videos. I'm telling you this up front. This is one of those videos. Brought to us by our good brothers over at Black Journals. How slave skins were used for leather, what schools hide. This is one of those videos that we're going to review. Buckle up. Here we go.
Boston, 1770. The air was thick with gunpowder and panic after the Boston Massacre. Amidst the chaos, the lifeless body of Crispus Attucks lay on the cobblestone street. Attucks, a black sailor and former slave, had become the first martyr of the American Revolution. His blood had barely dried when a sinister opportunist crept forward. Dr. John Warren, a respected Boston physician, saw more than a fallen patriot. He saw a grisly opportunity. Under the cover of night, Warren secretly stole a portion of Attucks' skin, acting with neither consent nor conscience. In a dim workshop, the doctor set about an unholy craft. He treated and tanned the piece of human skin just as one would animal hide. In the following days, a bookbinder received this unusual material. From it, the artisan crafted a small notebook bound in smooth, dark leather that had, only days before, been the living skin of Crispus Attucks. An inscription attached to it reads, "The cover of this book is made of tanned skin from the Negro whose execution caused the War of Independence." It was a deeply disturbing sales pitch, exploiting Attucks' newfound fame as a revolutionary martyr. Curious buyers marveled at the quality of its binding, few suspecting the true origin. Attucks' own flesh, once part of a vibrant, courageous man, had been reduced to a commodity, a morbid curiosity for those with the luxury to indulge in horror. Today, that very notebook resides in the Wellcome Collection in London. It sits behind glass, dark and silent, a haunting reminder of how easily human life and dignity were cast aside in the pursuit of profit and novelty. This chilling tale is not a standalone anomaly, but rather a window into one of history's most disturbing practices. In the shadows of the 18th and 19th centuries, an unspeakable trade flourished. The skin of black slaves was harvested and fashioned into leather. Shoes, belts, books, and even furniture, ordinary items for some, were sometimes made from the very flesh of the oppressed. Today, we're going to explore this dark chapter of history, a time when black skin was stripped of its humanity and reduced to raw material. It is a history written in suffering and blood, but it is also one that must be told, so that we may honor the souls who experienced it and ensure such cruelty is never forgotten. Subscribe to this channel, share this story, and help us keep uncovering the truths that were buried for far too long. Now, let's begin. The transformation of human beings into mere commodities did not happen overnight. It was a gradual erosion of empathy, a poisonous idea that took root over centuries. But to understand how anyone could even conceive of using human skin as leather, we must first understand the mindset of slavery itself. From the 16th century onward, European traders and colonists systematically reduced millions of African men, women, and children to the status of property, to be bought, sold, used, and disposed of at an owner's whim. In the transatlantic slave trade, human lives were appraised no differently than livestock or cargo. This was the origin of the unspeakable, Once a human being was seen as nothing more than an object, it opened the door to ultimate dehumanization. Between 1526 and 1867, over 12 million African people were forcibly transported across the Atlantic to the Americas. Crammed into the holds of slave ships, they endured the Middle Passage, a voyage of such brutality that millions died from disease, abuse, and despair before ever reaching land. The bodies of the dead were routinely cast overboard into the indifferent ocean. But scattered accounts suggest that not every deceased captive was discarded into the sea. On some voyages, especially as the trade progressed, certain corpses were set aside and preserved. Why? Because in the bleak logic of profit, even death was seen as an opportunity. The skin of these Africans could be harvested like animal hide. On the plantations of the New World, the commodification of human beings continued in every imaginable form. Enslaved people's labor was extracted to grow the crops that made fortunes. Their children were born into bondage and sold away. Their bodies were violated for punishment or pleasure. And as we explore here, even their corpses could be put to use. The idea of turning human skin into material belongs to some of history's darkest nightmares. Across eras, stories tell of conquerors skinning their enemies, ancient Scythian warriors fashioning quivers from the flesh of foes, or medieval executioners displaying the hides of traitors as gruesome warnings. In Europe's early modern period, there were occasional cases of skinning as punishment. One infamous legend from the French Revolution tells of a tannery in Meudon, near Paris, where the skins of guillotined aristocrats were said to be processed into leather for breeches and other goods. These were shocking exceptions meant to terrorize or titillate. But within the Atlantic slave system, the practice took on a systematic, racialized form. It was no longer a moment of revenge or aberration, but an extension of an economy built entirely on human bondage. In Virginia, 1709, William Byrd II, a wealthy planter and statesman, kept a secret diary that revealed the darkest corners of his life. In an entry from June of that year, Byrd matter-of-factly recounted a deadly incident. He had gotten into a great dispute with an enslaved man named Ned. Ned had been insolent and obstinate, Byrd wrote. Enraged, Byrd struck the man violently with his cane. Within a few hours, Ned was dead from the blows. But the horror did not end with the man's life. According to later reports, Byrd then ordered that Ned's skin be stripped from his body. The skin was sent to a local tannery, processed in the same manner as one might tan a deer hide. From this tanned human skin, Byrd had fashioned personal items, a pair of finely made gloves and a small pouch. If this sounds like a ghastly tale from a fever dream, it tragically illustrates the mindset of many enslavers. Byrd felt entitled not only to take Ned's life, but to literally take his skin as a souvenir of his dominance. Across the Atlantic in the Caribbean, similar attitudes emerged. On the island of Jamaica, an Englishman named Thomas Thistlewood became notorious for the cruelty detailed in his own private journals. Thistlewood managed plantations in the mid-18th century and documented thousands of daily entries about his treatment of enslaved Africans. That man is infamous for recording brutal punishments and sexual violence without a hint of remorse. Hidden among his horrific entries are passages that reveal another form of cruelty. Thistlewood recorded that he had taken the skin of certain slaves after death and used it to make leather. In one case, he described curing strips of a man's skin to make a harness strap or belt. In another, he mentioned fashioning a small riding whip from the hide of an executed slave. These diary passages are blunt, almost mundane in tone, as if logging farm chores. Yet they reveal a heart of absolute darkness. A man so accustomed to viewing his slaves as subhuman that he treated their remains as one might treat the hide of a slaughtered ox. These origins of human skin leather are entwined with the very foundations of slavery and colonial conquest. Edward Long, a British colonial official and historian in Jamaica during the late 1700s, exemplified the deadly ideology that underpinned such acts. Long authored a sprawling tome titled The History of Jamaica, in which he infamously argued that Africans were naturally inferior to Europeans, a deplorable justification for slavery. But Long's contempt for black people didn't stop at theory. According to later reports, Edward Long himself engaged in the ultimate dehumanization, having the skin of an enslaved person, a young black woman from his estate, removed after death and tanned. Pieces of that skin were allegedly used to bind a special copy of Long's own book. To those who engaged in such acts, black skin was simply a novel material, exotic leather of the rarest kind. In their perverse view, it was a natural extension of slavery's logic. After all, if one could trade the living bodies of black people, why not profit from their dead bodies as well? It was within this context that the commodification of human skin took root, a collision of racial hatred, profit motive, and morbid curiosity. And it all manifested in the plantations. In the antebellum American South and the colonies of the Caribbean, the plantation was the center of economic life and of human misery. The wealth of cotton, sugar, and tobacco was wrung from the labor of enslaved people. Every aspect of a slave's existence was controlled and exploited by the plantation owner. It is here, amid the fields and manors, that the gruesome trade in human leather took on a more concrete form. While the idea of flaying human skin might have emerged in isolated acts during the 1700s, by the 1800s, it coalesced into something of an underground industry. On certain plantations, and in the markets of some port cities, one could quietly find leather goods fashioned from the skin of black men and women. This black leather trade, as it came to be known, was never a mainstream part of the economy. It lurked in the shadows. Yet it was present enough to leave a trail in historical records. As the demand for these exotic leather goods grew in certain circles, a few opportunists realized there was profit to be made from the unthinkable. One example of a business venture in this grim market was the Negro Leather Company, based in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, though a northern city, had a long history of tanneries and medical schools, and it straddled the line between North and South, making it a unique nexus for such a trade. According to later recollections, this company operated in the mid-19th century by presenting itself as lawful, while its trade was anything but. They would discreetly procure human skin, primarily from deceased enslaved people or freshly executed black prisoners. How did they obtain these bodies? Sometimes by purchase. There were slave owners cynical enough to sell the remains of a deceased slave for a bit of extra income. In other cases, the company paid intermediaries, perhaps an undertaker looking to profit, or grave robbers willing to dig up a corpse in the dead of night. Philadelphia's large medical colleges were another source. Anatomy labs often had the cadavers of black people for dissection, and once the students were done, the remnants could find their way into nefarious hands. On paper, everything was kept quiet, but the actual process was straightforward and chillingly similar to ordinary leather production. Imagine a work table in a clandestine tannery. First, the acquired human skin, sometimes just patches from backs or thighs, would be carefully cleaned. Any remaining flesh, fat, or blood would be scraped off. Next, the skin was soaked in a vat of water or chemical solution to soften it. If hair was present, as it often was, especially if the skin came from the scalp or a hairy part of the body, it would be removed with knives or by a liming process, just as tanners removed hair from cowhides. Then came the tanning itself. Traditional tanning agents, like oak bark or other vegetable tannins, were applied to the human skin. Over days or weeks in a tannin bath, the skin would be chemically transformed, the collagen stabilizing into a durable, leathery material that would not rot. The hide, once human, would slowly turn supple, tan, or brown in color and take on the look and feel of fine leather. After tanning, it was rinsed and stretched out to dry. The tanned skin might be remarkably soft. Those who handled it often remarked with perverse admiration that it was as smooth as the finest calfskin, with an extra flexibility that was unparalleled in other leathers. Finally, the pieces were curried with oils or waxes to further soften and preserve them. At this stage, one might not even recognize what origin it had. To any casual observer, it could simply be high-quality leather, except perhaps for a certain pore pattern or the hint of pigmentation that betrayed it as something else. Once the human leather was ready, it was handed over to craftsmen to be made into goods. The Negro Leather Company of Philadelphia and its ilk would cut and sew the material into whatever was ordered. Wealthy clients might commission a set of boots made entirely from black leather or a fancy wallet, or even decorative leather panels for furniture. Carefully coded advertisements began to appear in certain trade catalogs and newspapers of the era. Phrases like exotic leather available, inquiries welcome, were sometimes tucked in. It is horrifying to imagine a society where such ads ran at all, but they did, often escaping general outrage because many readers either skipped over them or didn't realize the literal truth of what was being offered. But not all these cases stayed in the shadows. Some became known to the wider public, igniting shock and moral outrage. One particularly notable incident occurred in 1835 in the American South. An enslaved man named William Johnson died under murky circumstances. Some accounts claim he was lynched after attempting to escape. Others, that he collapsed and died after relentless overwork and abuse. What followed pushed the boundaries of cruelty even further. His body was handed over to a local tanner, a trade that normally turned cowhide into saddles and harnesses for the plantation economy. But instead of animal hide, the tanner used Johnson's skin. Within weeks, a saddlebag appeared in the town, its smooth surface unmistakably human. Word of the atrocity spread quickly. Abolitionist newspapers in the North seized on the story. Publications such as The Liberator, edited by William Lloyd Garrison, reported the case with grim detail, identifying Johnson as the victim. For abolitionists, the saddlebag was a horrifying but tangible symbol of slavery's dehumanization. They presented it as proof that the institution reduced Black people not only to labor, but to raw material, literally stripping them of humanity, even in death. Southern authorities, however, scrambled to contain the fallout. Some planters and newspapers denounced the reports as fabrications meant to inflame public opinion. Others argued it must have been an isolated act, not representative of civilized society in the South. Yet eyewitness accounts from travelers and anti-slavery activists who claimed to have seen and examined the saddlebag made the denials ring hollow. The scandal surrounding William Johnson's death and the grotesque transformation of his body into a saddlebag became a rallying point in the wider debate over slavery. To Northern readers, it epitomized the barbarity of a system that had no limits, one willing to profit from human flesh even after death. To the South, it was a dangerous exposure, forcing defenders of slavery to confront charges that their society was built not only on forced labor, but on the complete commodification of Black bodies. The outrage was genuine and widespread, and it pressured authorities to quietly clamp down on these practices. In the following decades, a growing taboo formed around the subject, even in the South. By 1850, when the U.S. Congress passed the notorious Fugitive Slave Act to tighten the grip on runaway slaves, abolitionists were demanding that all forms of mistreatment, including the desecration of the dead, be brought under scrutiny. Although no federal statute ever directly addressed the use of human skin for leather, existing laws against grave robbing and corpse mutilation began to be enforced more strictly in certain states and municipalities. The climate was changing, slowly but surely, to cast this particular atrocity as beyond the pale of what society could tolerate. Nonetheless, in the dark corners of the plantation economy, the trade in Black human leather persisted through the mid-19th century. It was abetted not just by the cruel whims of individual slave owners, but also by a network of craftsmen and even medical professionals who saw an opportunity. And it is to those medical figures, the academic men of science, that the story now turns. Doctors and anatomists of the 18th and 19th centuries were among the few people who had routine access to human bodies outside of graveyards. Medical colleges, especially in the North, depended on cadavers for anatomy practice, and a disproportionate number of those cadavers were Black, often the marginalized, the unclaimed, or the executed. Supplying those bodies was the work of the infamous resurrection men, grave robbers who targeted Black cemeteries precisely because desecrating Black graves provoked less public outcry than disturbing white ones. In this grim trade of bodies, it was not difficult for a tanner or a curious doctor to secure pieces of skin. Some physicians went further still. Memoirs and medical writings of the era contain passing mentions of surgeons who kept fragments of tattooed skin as curiosities, or who experimented with tanning small patches of hide out of scientific interest. Most often, though, anthropodermic bookbinding arose directly from dissection rooms. Doctors would take flesh from cadavers they worked on and use it to cover books, sometimes a favorite textbook, sometimes a personal journal, sometimes even a volume they had authored themselves. To them, it was a morbid form of memorial, or a way to flaunt their privileged access to something most people regarded with horror. By the 19th century, enough books bound in human leather existed that they became objects of legend in libraries and private collections. Many were produced by physicians, and a striking number of those doctors chose volumes on anatomy, crime, or the human condition, as if making a grim statement about the subjects inside. There are many documented cases of books bound in the skin of Black people. A copy of Narrative of a 5 Years Expedition Against the Revolted Negroes of Suriname, 1796, by John Gabriel Stedman, was, according to later accounts, bound in the skin of an executed Black man from Suriname. This is particularly horrific, as Stedman's book itself detailed his experiences fighting Maroon rebels in Suriname, enslaved people who had escaped and formed their own communities. Binding that story in the skin of a man so much like the people described in its pages was an act of pure colonial triumph, turning a human life into a cover for conquest. The man himself is remembered only by the label Hottentot, a term that stripped him of identity and humanity. To anyone who didn't know, the book looked like any other, its brown leather surface giving away nothing. But for those aware of its true origin, holding it must have brought a grim and twisted satisfaction. Another example comes from an edition of the Poems of Thomas Gray, 1998, rebound by a collector using the skin of an enslaved person from the Caribbean. Thomas Gray was an English poet known for meditations on mortality. His elegy, written in a country churchyard, reflects on the graves of the forgotten poor. The irony is striking. A book of Gray's gentle, humane poetry wrapped in the skin of someone who died enslaved, far from any peaceful English churchyard. The person who ordered this binding may have done it for shock value or to create a grotesque contrast between beauty and horror. A copy of The History of Jamaica, 1774, by Edward Long was also rumored to be bound in the skin of a Black woman. If true, it may well have been Long's own doing or that of a contemporary who shared his vile ideology. The History of Jamaica cataloged biased theories used to justify slavery. Enclosing it in a Black woman's skin transforms the book into a chilling artifact, a literal encapsulation of oppression. Imagine reading Long's justification of slavery while your hands rest on the tanned flesh of one of slavery's victims. The thought alone sends shivers down the spine. Equally grotesque is a medical. Those who created or purchased these anthropodermic books often gave high-minded justifications. Some claimed it was done in remembrance of the individuals, a grotesque form of memorial, as if turning someone into a book would honor their sacrifice or suffering. More often, however, the motive was personal satisfaction, a kind of thrill or vanity. Owning a book bound in human skin was a status symbol in a twisted collector's world. For doctors, it might have been a way to show their clinical detachment or to immortalize their connection with a particular cadaver. These medical atrocities were not limited to clandestine keepsakes and private collections. Some found their way into general knowledge via exhibitions. In the late 19th century, with slavery abolished and a new age of so-called scientific racism dawning, a different kind of dehumanization took center stage. Human remains, including skin, were displayed as curiosities at fairs or in medical museums. For instance, in the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, essentially a World's Fair, amidst all the splendors of modern invention, there were sideshow displays that catered to the morbid. One such exhibit purported to show items made from human skin collected around the world. Promoters boasted of possessing a piece of tanned African Negro skin, likely an old remnant of slavery repurposed for shock value. It's absolutely disgusting to think that even after slavery's end, Black bodies could still be commodified, turned into entertainment, marketed as curios, and consumed as spectacle. Yet as we reckon with these accounts, it's important to recognize that voices of conscience did exist, even within the very communities that carried out such practices. Some doctors and students recoiled in horror when they encountered human skin bindings. In 1876, a young medical student in Paris recorded in his diary how a classmate proudly displayed a strip of tanned, dark skin taken from a cadaver, likely from a colonial hospital. "I felt a revulsion I could barely hide," he wrote. "Is this what science does to us? Make us collectors of human leather? God help us if we lose our basic respect for the dead." His solitary voice is a reminder that not all were blind to the horror. Some recognized it and pushed back, and in doing so, laid the first stones of resistance. A defining shift in attitudes came with the growing emphasis on consent and dignity in medicine toward the end of the 19th century. After the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, African Americans, though still facing entrenched racism, began to demand proper respect for their dead. Scandals over grave robbing in black cemeteries, such as the 1788 Doctors' Riot in New York, and later cases in the Reconstruction South, fueled public outrage. In response, laws were gradually introduced to protect burial grounds and require consent for dissections. By the early 20th century, the use of human skin for commercial products was not only illegal, but broadly condemned as grotesque and inhuman. What had once been flaunted as curiosity now retreated into the shadows, surviving only in rare criminal acts or as dark folklore. Yet history had one more ghastly chapter to reveal. In the 20th century, the idea of human skin as a material reappeared in a far more sinister context. During World War II, Nazi concentration camps produced horrific accounts of guards and officials fashioning items from the skin of murdered inmates, most infamously lampshades at Buchenwald. The victims were Jews, Roma, and others. And although not black, the underlying mindset was chillingly familiar. Entire groups declared subhuman, their bodies considered usable even in death. When reports of these grotesque souvenirs reached the world after the war, outrage was universal. At the Nuremberg trials, such evidence was used to demonstrate the depths of Nazi depravity. The verdict was unmistakable. To treat human skin as leather is not a curiosity, not a commodity, but a crime against humanity. By the mid-20th century, one name would become infamous for creating objects out of human body parts, this time without any racial motive, but equally reflective of dehumanization. Ed Gein, a loner farmer in Wisconsin, was arrested in 1957 and shocked the American public. In his ramshackle farmhouse, police discovered a nightmarish scene. Gein had exhumed corpses from a cemetery and murdered at least 2 women. He fashioned numerous items from their remains. There were chairs upholstered in human skin, a lampshade made of a human face, a belt decorated with female nipples, and a shoebox full of noses, to name a few of his grotesqueries. Gein's case had no connection to the slavery-era atrocities. His obsessions were born of mental illness and twisted desire. But it proved that the concept of human leather was not relegated to distant history. It could reappear in the darkest corners of society. Ed Gein's story captivated and repulsed Americans in equal measure, inspiring horror films like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In the context of our narrative, Gein is a grim outlier, yet he serves as a modern mirror to historical events, reflecting how when empathy and respect vanish, the unthinkable becomes possible anew. Today, actual human leather goods are almost unheard of in commerce, but the idea persists in the realm of art and hypothetical ethics. A few years ago, a fashion designer named Tina Gorjanc made headlines by proposing a project to grow human skin in a lab using the DNA of the late designer Alexander McQueen, with the aim of creating a leather jacket from this lab-grown skin. Gorjanc's project was largely conceptual, intended to provoke discussion about biotechnology, consent, and luxury. It deliberately echoed the ghastly history of human leather to make people confront their comfort levels. If one could grow skin painlessly in a lab, is it acceptable to make a jacket from it? The project asks us to consider what truly disturbed us about historical human leather. Was it the cruelty, the lack of consent, the fact that someone suffered? If those elements are removed, is it still wrong? Many find the idea viscerally disturbing regardless, demonstrating that for most of us, human skin simply should not be a commodity, no matter how it's obtained. Meanwhile, on the internet, rumors occasionally flare up about companies selling human leather products to ultra-wealthy clients. One site calling itself Human Leather claimed to offer belts, wallets, and shoes made from donated human skin at exorbitant prices and with a long waiting list. Journalists who tried to investigate often hit dead ends, and it's widely suspected that such operations are either elaborate hoax or extremely fringe, if they exist at all. Still, the fact that these rumors circulate indicates a lingering dark fascination. The specter of the past lingers. The idea that somewhere, hidden from view, someone might still be practicing this hideous craft. Whether or not that's true, it's a reminder that human nature has not wholly rid itself of morbid curiosity and the temptation of forbidden fruits. In literature and film, the legacy of human leather surfaces as a symbol of ultimate horror or moral corruption. References to slavery's leather making appear in novels and movies, as a way to highlight the monstrousness of certain villains or regimes. For instance, in Toni Morrison's beloved 1987, while the story does not center on human leather, the haunting imagery of slavery's brutality has inspired later writers to use details like Negro skin in historical fiction to emphasize a character's wickedness. In horror fiction, the idea of books bound in human skin recurs, drawn partly from real history and partly from H.P. Lovecraft's fictional Necronomicon, a volume said to be wrapped in human hide. These creative works, while sensational, keep the memory of past atrocities alive in a cautionary form. They remind us that this is what humanity is capable of when prejudice and power go unchecked. But perhaps the most significant echo in the present is the ongoing conversation about race, medicine, and ethics. The historical use of Black bodies without consent, whether for forced labor, medical experimentation, or even trinkets and commodities, has left deep scars. African American communities are, understandably, often distrustful of medical institutions, a legacy of abuses from slavery through the 20th century, like the Tuskegee study or the exploitation of Henrietta Lacks cells without consent. When modern science pushes new frontiers such as biotechnology, people of color are vigilant to make sure such a history is not repeated. The question of who owns human biological materials, for instance, is now carefully regulated. Today, if skin or organs are donated or used in research, it is governed by ethical protocols that emphasize consent and dignity. Internationally, the conversation widens into a broader human rights issue. The United Nations and other organizations have documented cases, particularly in conflict zones and under repressive regimes, where atrocities included mutilating victims and keeping body parts as trophies. These crimes were not racially targeted in the same way as the Black human leather of slavery, but they reflected the same chilling impulse to strip away the humanity of an entire group. Whenever news of such acts has surfaced, global condemnation has been swift, recognizing this as a boundary that must never be crossed. That response is shaped, at least in part, by the memory of past horrors and the collective vow of never again. The story of using the skin of Black slaves for leather stands as one of the darkest chapters in human history. It confronts us with evil in its rawest form. And yet, as we look at the world today, the echoes of that history demand to be heard. They compel us to resist injustice, to confront racism, to defend the rights of the marginalized, and to insist on ethics in science and medicine. In doing so, we are answering those echoes. We are saying, we remember. We carry the weight of that memory, and in their name, we work toward a more just and humane world. May we never forget the lives and stories of those whose very skin was stolen. And may we, through our actions and values, ensure that no such darkness ever takes root again. In this way, we honor their suffering, not only by remembering, but by building a future where every human being is treated with the dignity and respect that were so cruelly denied to them. Thank you for listening, for bearing witness to this difficult history. May these stories strengthen our resolve to uphold the value of every human life, and may the resilience of the human spirit guide us forward.
All right. Told y'all this was going to be one of those videos. And that's exactly what we had. One of those videos where the evil shine through, where evil, sinister people moved against a forsaken people, and it went completely off the rails. What can we take away from this video? Simple and plain. Some people are evil. Some people are evil. And they move in evil. Take the skin of a person and to utilize that skin for any purpose is barbaric, inhumane, and beyond unreasonable. It is horrible. It is it's sickening. It's disgusting. and for the human mind to come to a conclusion that this would be an acceptable mode of practice, an acceptable ideal to behave in this manner, to take the skin of a person and utilize it for any purpose other than burial. It's sickening, disgusting, and only a depraved mind would operate in that function. You have to be sick, and someone offered me anything that was made from the skin of a person, I would have zero interest in that thing. If someone offered me anything that was made from a skin of a person, I didn't say a so-called black person, I didn't say any other type of person, but any person, I would immediately decline and would not be interested in any skin that came from a human. That is utterly disgusting and sick and without any manner of humanity. I'm not sugarcoating. I'm not uh, pit-patting around this topic. Any person who operates with a skin of another person is an ill um, is a mentally ill person. And if someone offers you a skin of a human and you consider whether you should have this skin in your possession that was a human being, then you are sick. You are ill. And you should be dreadfully ashamed of yourself. Dreadfully ashamed of yourself. Horrible, horrible situation. All right. Those are my final thoughts on that particular video. Like I said, it was going to be a hard video. Nevertheless, just because it's hard don't mean it doesn't need to be done. I am your Akazaki Yahoo. Go ahead and close this on out. Do this for a specific purpose. Romans chapter 10 and verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Ha'abba for Israel is that they might be saved. We want to see our people saved. We want to see our people set free. We want to see our people restored to the prominence that the Most High have promised for Israel. How are we going to do it? First of all, we're going to keep the faith and the belief in the Messiah, Hamashiach, in his return to fulfill the Most High, the Father's command that Israel be restored back to the place that he would have us to be. And also, Ecclesiastes chapter number 12 and verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important to understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled, and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged. Or rather, we have feared the Most High and kept His commandments, because this is the whole duty of man. I am your Akazaki Yahu, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahweh Bashem Mashiach, wa Malak Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say Shalom wa Baruchi, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet until that day come. Shalom, Israel. Praises to the Most High. Praise you, Abba Yah, Kwam Yasha'Allah, and Barak Hashem, Yahweh.